Hello, my name's Duncan, and welcome to Back Away from Donkey and Bath Books. And this is Vlogmas, and I think it's day 10. And so today we've got another reading, and today it's going to be a story by John Christopher. If you don't know, John Christopher was famous for writing the Tripods trilogy, which is what people now call young adult, which is a pseudo genre that people have invented. But yes, the Tripod trilogy, and also the Death of Grass. He died, I think, around about 2012. But this is a short story of his called Christmas Roses, and it's from the collection Christmas on Ganymede. I don't know where it was originally published. Christmas Roses by John Christopher. The skipper cushioned us in nicely. I had my eyes on the dial the whole time, and the needle never got above 4.5 Gs. With a boat like the Arkland, that was good. I've known a bad pilot touch even 7 Gs on an earth landing. All the same, I didn't feel so hot. Young Stenway was out of his cradle before the tremors had stopped. I lay still a moment while he stood over me, grinning. He said, "Break it up, Joe. Dreaming of a pension?" I got up with a bounce and landed him a playful clip that rocked him back into his own cradle. There was normal gravity underneath us, the feeling of rightness, in your bones and muscles, no matter how long you've been away. It was good to feel myself tough still. Stenway said, "So this is Washington. What day is it?" I said, "You revert to type, quick kid. How should I know what day it is? I'm only a visitor." He grinned, flushing a little, and went over to the multiple calendar. I saw him fingering his face screwed up. He said, "Friday." "Say, Joe, if we take more than 14 days on a turnaround, we'll make Christmas here." I said, "If we make more than 10 days on turnaround, the whole board of directors will commit gory suicide. What's worrying you? You'll get plum duff in Luna City?" He grinned lopsidedly and went out in a hurry. I was a bit sorry for him. He'd done less than a year in the service. Things weren't the right pattern for him yet. He probably thought some of us were tough eggs, but we had to ride him down now and then for his own good. I went along to see Louis. He'd been in space only a couple of years less than I had, and we'd both been with the Arkland since she was commissioned 8 years before. But we didn't see each other much, working on different shifts and pretty nearly at opposite ends of the boat. I found him in the mess, sprucing up. He said, "Hello, Joe, are you still with us?" I said, "Why not? I'm only young once." "Borrowed time," he said, "just borrowed time." I said, "Louis, do me a favour." He said, "Any little thing." He put down a hairbrush and started powdering his face, overlaying the finely ravelled seams of red that told he'd been out in vacuum. I couldn't understand that myself. It made you a bit unusual on Earth. It stamped you as a spaceman. But hell, who'd be ashamed of that? Still, I'd never been branding myself, so maybe I shouldn't talk. I said, "You're handling loading for the next trip." He pressed the powder in with his fingertips and nodded. "I want to get something on board," I said. "How big?" he asked. I shrugged lightly. "About 5 feet long, maybe 3 feet across each way, at its widest, but it will squeeze a bit." Louis jutted his chin out and flicked a patch of black velvet across his face. He spoke through his teeth. "What about the Pentagon building, if you want a souvenir?" "What would I do with the Pentagon building?" Louis turned around. "Look, Joe, you know how things are. You know the cost of space freighting. There isn't a 1/4 ounce of cargo weight that isn't accounted for. What do you want to fit it in anyway?" "It's for old hands," I told him. "I thought of taking him a Christmas tree." Louis didn't say anything for a moment. He had brushed the powder well in, and you could still see the crimson network beneath. At last he said, "Okay, get out of here the night before we blast. I'll fix it for you." I said, "Thanks, Louis. When will that be, by the way? Have they told you?" 19th, he said. "Now go and raise hell for 9 days. Don't forget the medical tomorrow." I looked at him sharply, but he was brushing another layer of powder in. Medical was routine, always taken between 18 and 24 hours after cushioning. The doctors knew why, or said they did. It wasn't the sort of thing you needed to be reminded of, but it wasn't worth taking him up on it. The Arkland touched at Washington every 5th trip. I knew quite a few numbers, and I went all out to raise my usual cane. There was a somber moment once when one of the girls relaxed and the wrinkles stood out, but it passed. There's always the younger generation. I let it get round on 2 days from blasting before I was dropped in the company's office. They've got a block of masonry on Roosevelt Boulevard that's bigger than Luna City. Welfare is on floor 32. It makes me airsick to look out of their windows. There was a little blonde on the desk. She said hello very brightly. It occurred to me that next time I might contact welfare at the beginning of the furlough. She looked as though she could get through my back pay as well as any. I said, "You can help me. I want to buy something." She was restrained but eager. "Yeah, I want to buy a Christmas tree." She looked surprised and rather disappointed, but she was businesslike. She waded through a pile of directories like a terrier after rats. Christmas tree, she said. Your best bet is the Lee Cliff Nurseries, Mr. Cliff, about 15 miles out. You can pick up a gyro on the roof. I said, don't tell me there's a roof on this thing. She smiled very nicely. I said, keep a week free next November. I'll be back. The gyro did the trip in just over 10 minutes. Where it put me down, you wouldn't guess such a place as Washington existed. Only way out there were lots of low sheds and a few glass houses. The other way, there were just fields of plants growing. I realised it was more than 10 years since I'd been outside the city on the Earth furlough. You get into habits. It occurred to me that I might have been missing something. They had phoned. Mr. Cliff, I was coming. Good service is the company's motto. He was waiting when the gyro touched down. A little round fellow with a look as though something had surprised him. He said, Major Davis, I'm delighted to see you. We don't see many spacemen out here. Come and see my roses. He seemed eager and I let him take me. I wasn't breaking my neck to get back into town. He had a glass house full of roses. I hesitated in the doorway. Mr. Cliff said, well? I'd forgotten they smelled like that, I said. He said proudly, it's quite a showing. A week before Christmas and showing like that. Look at this, Frau Kaldruski. It was a white rose, very nicely shaped and scented like spring. The roses had me. I crawled round after Mr. Cliff, seeing roses, feeling roses, breathing roses. I looked at my watch when it began to get dark. I said, I came to buy a Christmas tree. We left the rose house reluctantly. Mr. Cliff said, Christmas on Earth for a change. I liked Mr. Cliff. I said, no, Lunar City. It's for someone there. He waited for me to go on. A guy called Hans, I said. He's been nearly 40 years in Lunar City. He was born in a little village in Austria, halfway up a mountain with pines all around and snow on them in the winter. You know, he gets homesick. Mr. Cliff said, why doesn't he come back? It's always a shock when people know how little they know about the life you lead, though I suppose you can't blame them. I said to Mr. Cliff, the doctors have all tabbed. It's what they call cumulative stress. You can't bring a boat or push her off without an initial strain. It varies with the planets, of course. For Earth, with an average-sized vessel, the peak's about 5 or 6 gravities. I flexed my shoulders back, breathing this different air. You've got to be tough physically, I said, but even so it tells. It's the heart, chiefly. They give you a warning when it begins to flicker, and you can drop out then with a pension. Of course, there are some who can carry on. They're used to the life, and said Mr. Cliff, there's a final warning as well. They check up on you after each trip, vet you for the next. The one time it's just a plain no. You can argue, but that answer's no. Another takeoff would finish you. So they say there's no way of testing it. They just don't let you on a boat after that. Mr. Cliff said, that's very considerate. I laughed. Oh, very. The only thing is, they check you each landfall. Hans got his final warning on Lunar City. Mr. Cliff said, oh. He bent his head to smell the red rose on his coat. How long ago did you say? Hans is an old man, over 70. Generally you get your first warning when you're about 30. Near enough 40 years, I suppose. And how big is Lunar City? That's easy, I said. It's in the guidebooks. A couple of blocks long by a block wide. It goes underground a bit as well. That's terrible, Mr. Cliff said softly. 40 years like that, no trees, no birds, and young men know that and still take the risk. I can't believe it. It was an old story, but I never felt myself getting so mad about it before. I reined myself in. He was a nice old guy. I said, you don't understand, Mr. Cliff. There's something in the life, and sometimes there is more than 5 years between the first and final warnings. One guy went 10. There's always one more trip. That's worth taking before you settle down for good. They don't recruit spacemen and give up easy, and you may always strike lucky and get your ticket at this end. He said gently, when did you get your first warning, Major Davies? I flushed. 3 years ago. So what? Now this matter of the Christmas tree, Mr. Cliff. Mr. Cliff said, I'll show you. The Christmas tree is on me. Please, I want to. Thanks, Mr. Cliff. For Hans, too. I own some stock in Lunar Mines, he blinked. 40 years. He led me away to show me the fir tree, and the scent of the roses gave way to the rich, piney smell that made me remember being a kid and holidays up on the lakes, he said. I've been thinking, Major Davies. I've got a proposition that may interest you. I didn't see Louis when the tree went on board. One of his boys handled it. There wasn't a sign of any of the company police around, and I guess Louis was distracting them down at a night office with a friendly game of poker. Skinning them too, if I knew Louis. I didn't see him until the end of my second shift on the trip. The radar screen was beautiful, blank. It was a clear season for meteors. Louis was lolling in front of it, reading The Three Musketeers. I said I always knew I slipped up when I majored in nav. Do they pay you for this? Sometimes there's ill feeling about the large stretches of easy time radar ops managed to corner, but Louis knew I've been in space too long for that. Until the automatic relays smarten up a lot, there's got to be a man on the screen, and the company doesn't give time away. The radar section handled the quartermastering too. Every third furlough they'd lose 2 days. Louis grinned. I've got a weak heart. Didn't you know? I tossed him a cigarette. Thanks for getting baby on board. What did you throw out? Gold bars? He shook his head. Just my old brand of math. If that orbit you've laid us turns out bad enough, we'll hit the sun approximately 10 minutes sooner than we would otherwise, and I've got to pep my meter deflection up 0.003 of a second. It's a big risk. I hope it's good, I said. I'll only ever lay one better. Next trick, I'm going to lay the tightest Moon-Earth orbit since Christensen came in from the Leonids. After that, you needn't worry about my failing eyes, Louis. He said, I'm glad, Joe. I always knew you had a sense. I'm dropping out the moment they give me a hint. It's not worth it. I said, yes, I'm really going. Louis said, you'll miss it. You'll get over that. You would have to anyway before long. I said, it's out in the country, Louis. A nursery, grown plants, all kind of plants. Fir trees and chrysanthemums and daffodils and roses at Christmas. And the moon's no more than something you plant. By. I shan't miss anything. He said, you're lucky, Joe. That's what it is. You're lucky. We cushioned at 3 Gs and I felt it again. A long ache inside my chest, as though my heart and lungs were tied up in strings and someone was twisting them nice and slowly. It was all right after a few minutes, and I got up, light and active under moon gravities. I wasted no time getting through the main lock. I looked for old Hans among those who stood by, and there was no sign of him. He came waddling over airily, with a bulk like his. I could almost understand why he had chosen Lunar City. He shrugged, lifting everything, hands, shoulders, and the eyebrows. Too late now, he said. He died just after nightfall. We're taking him out in a few hours. With the sunrise and the thin air melts and the grey lichen runs like a sickness along the crater bottoms, and in that jungle the minute lunar insects awakened to fight battles as real as a Tyrannosaurus ever knew. Long before the crater shadows lengthened towards sunset, the cleft is empty again. No flesh, no hair, no scrap of bone escapes them. Portuguese drove the caterpillar out through the airlock. Louis and I sat behind him, and old Hans's body, covered by a sheet, on the floor between us. We were silent while the little truck jolted on its metal tracks across granite, pumping some frozen lava. And I don't think it was the death inside that silenced us. We had liked old Hans, but he had had his time and was released now to the infinity of the narrow confines of Lunar City. It was the death outside that quietened us, as it quietens any man who goes out among those age-old crests and pinnacles under those glaring stars. Portuguese halted the caterpillar on the crest of a rise about midway between Lunar City and Kelly's crater. It was the usual burial ground. The planet's surface here was cross-hatched in deep grooves by some age-old catastrophe. We clamped down the visors on our suits and got out. Portuguese and I carried old Hans easily between us, his frail body fantastically light against the lunar gravity. We put him down carefully in a wide, deep cleft, and I turned around towards the truck. Louis walked towards us, carrying the Christmas tree. There had been moisture on it, which had frozen instantly in the sparkling frost. It looked like a centrepiece out of a store shop window. It had seemed like a good idea back at Lunar City, but now it didn't seem appropriate. We wedged it in with the rocks. Portuguese read a prayer, and we walked back towards the caterpillar, glad to be able to let our visors down again and light up the cigarettes. We stayed there while we smoked, looking through the front screen. The tree stood up green and white against the sullen, hunching blackness of Kelly's crater. Right overhead was Earth, glowing with daylight. I could make out Italy, clear and unsmudged, but further north, Hans's beloved Austria was hidden under the blotching December cloud. We didn't say anything. Portuguese squeezed out his cigarette and started the caterpillar up, turning back around again towards Lunar City. We ran into B-Lock, and the Portuguese stabbed the truck and came out again to join us. He put his fat arms around our shoulders. Come on, boys. Always drink on the house after a burying party. Louis said, medical first, Portuguese. We'll look in afterwards. Keep the rum hot for us. We saw him glide plumply away and turned back ourselves toward the admin buildings. The others had been through the medical while we were out, and we had a doctor each without waiting. We sat in the anteroom afterwards, waiting for them to write our cards up before we could collect them. At last, the call came through on the speaker. Major Graves, Squadron Enderby. Cards ready now. Louis got us first. He looked up at the big blue stamp on the front. First warning. He grinned. We'll go out in harnesses, Joe. Any chance of a third partnership in that flower business? I didn't say anything. I could see my card before the doctor gave it to me. I saw the red star splashed on it, and I'd seen so many of them not to know what it meant. It was the beginning of such a story as the one whose end, 40 years later, I had witnessed at the lee of Kelly's crater under the mocking globe of Earth. I said, this is my last trip, Doc. When we hit Antwerp, I'm retiring. He shook his head. I'm sorry, Major. I said, I don't care if it's 1,000,000 to 1 chance, Doc. I'll take it, and no hard feelings if it doesn't come off. I'll sign any disclaimer the company wants. He said, it's no good, Major. You know the regulation. These things are too foolproof now. We're not allowed to let you commit suicide. I knew it was no good too. Louis had gone. We all knew better than to stick around when someone got the Red Star. I had time to look at the doctor. He was very young and didn't look very happy. I guessed he hadn't handed out a star before. He said, it could be worse, Major. It could have been Phobos. I looked at him and he looked away. I walked out slowly. From the top level in Lunar City, you can see the sky. At night, the stars and the softly glowing earth. Down to the west, Sirius blazes over Kelly's crater. I've been up there for hours watching them. I keep thinking I can smell roses.